It's the Friday Cocktail, presented by Anna Glavinsky.
I'm joined now by Carmen Turner Schott, and she's a psychologist and she studies Zodiac archetypes as well and brings the two together, especially talking about past life memories and relationship patterns. Hello, how are you doing, Carmen?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us on this show. Where did your interest in, particularly in the Zodiac side of things, start for you?
Absolutely. It really started when I was in high school. You know, back in the 90s, I always felt different than other people, and I always was very intuitive, and I would dream things, and I was like, why am I so different than my family? So I started looking at different books, and I went into this little mystical bookstore in St. Louis, Missouri in the U.S. and got a little book about Virgo, and that's my sun sign, and it explained my personality to a T. And then I started learning how to do birth charts by hand. I just taught myself and became obsessed with it because it validated everything about my life. And I wanted to learn more, and I wanted to really use it as a tool to help other people, because I wanted to be a psychologist, a counselor. And I thought, wow, this is psychology and it's so deep. And I realized Carl Jung was an astrologer. And, you know, they don't tell you that when you're in college. You know, I found this out later in life, but it became my passion. And I live astrology. It is like everything I do. You know, I talk about it every day. I try to open people's minds. And a lot of people would never know that I'm an astrologer, but I've been doing it since I was 19 professionally. And now I'm 50. So it's been a long time.
That is, you know, you've dedicated a lifetime to this. Has there ever been any conflict with you? And you just mentioned another psychologist there who also studied astrology. But apart from that, where you see it coming together, has there ever been any conflict within the two fields for you in the way that you approach things or in the way that your clients understand things?
Absolutely. So, you know, I'm very, delicate and sensitive about how I bring up the topic. So, you know, I've always kind of kept both of them separate in a lot of ways, but also combined, if that makes sense. You know, separate websites, different jobs that I had, you know, in private practice, doing therapy with people. I always had people's birth times, or had their birth date. So I knew their sun sign at a minimum. And sometimes people would share with me that they're, you know, into all of this, or they might have Googled me and saw that, you know, that I'm an astrologer and wrote books. So they're really interested. You know, other people had no idea, you know, that I have an astrology as a tool. They don't have any clue. I do normal therapy. But I did work for the Air Force for 25 years in sexual assault prevention and response. And so I did kind of have to hide who I really was in a way in my career, except those closest to me, you know, my coworkers, they knew, because I'd tell them Mercury's retrograde or it's a full moon, you know, and they loved it. And they come and ask me, what's going on? You know, and they would see that I was right. They didn't really understand it, but I became more open around my team and the people that knew me. But it was pretty secretive. I remember one of my bosses, he had no idea that I wrote books. I mean, I just never really told people. And he came in one day and he said, Carmen, I didn't know you wrote books. And I said, how do you know? He said, I saw it on Amazon. I said, well, what were you looking up? Because you must have been looking up something a little different to find my books, you know? And he's like, I did. Oh my gosh, I had no idea. So sometimes I kept it kind of secret, but by the end, everybody kind of knew that, and they would call me for advice, you know, and ask me. But I don't work for the Air Force anymore. I left in March, and I'm doing astrological counseling full time and telehealth for military families. So I do both. You know, I do both, and I write books. So that's kind of my gig, because it's my passion. And I want to show that astrology is a tool of self-awareness, and it helps us heal, transform, and become more resilient. And I've seen it in my own life with my clients. I've done thousands of charts for people from all over the world. I've done a lot of research, and I think that's the thing that astrology has been lacking as a psychology field, is that, you know, it took psychology a long time to get recognized as not a pseudoscience. You know, psychology had to fight hard to really be seen as a true science back in the old days. So they really proved it through research and things like that. So I'm doing a lot of research on the 8th and 12th houses in astrology specifically, and how people with planets there have similar experiences. They have similar patterns and things that happen to them. And I have a quantitative study that I'm publishing in NCGR magazine. So I'm trying to do more research with it. And one of the cool things is recently I became a master's level social work professor at a university, and my boss is very open to this. And I was so shocked, because she said, I want you to be a keynote speaker, and I want you to train the social workers in the state on astrology and how it is a tool of healing. And I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. So I went and did this in September, created a whole slideshow, 60 slides, did an hour presentation, and I made it very hands-on practical, went through each sign, what their archetypes are, what their symbols, their energy, their strengths. But I focused on how they heal, how these signs heal. And everybody was so open to it. I was so surprised, because it's a rural, it's Kentucky. It's very Christian, very rural. But everyone was like, they all knew their sun sign. When I asked, everyone raised their hand. They knew. So everyone's interested in this. They just don't quite understand how it works. And so that's what I try to do, is write very basic, talk about it, basically try to teach people that it is a tool of healing, and it's nothing to be afraid of. It's like any tool. It's like any tool you use in therapy,
Absolutely. And I'm going to definitely pick your brains on some of the details there of what you're talking about, but still within sort of the idea of convince us, help us get a strong footing before we go into those details. You've worked in some very, very hard hitting areas. You've obviously seen people and spoken to people who've gone through some of the most worst things imaginable from what you mentioned there. Are you able to share any examples of where you could really see the crossover of, tough real life situations being healed through the astrology work?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that I use this for, and I see that it helps others, is a lot of times people feel like a victim, and they feel like the universe is against them, or why is this happening to me? Why did I lose my husband in an accident? Why did my mother die when I was 3 years old, right? All of these questions of a lot of trauma. And that's kind of my specialty, is using astrology to help people understand the trauma in their life, because I've had my own traumas, and that's how I became a social worker, really, and a counselor. Is when I was 16, I had a friend that was accidentally shot and killed, and that was the first person I ever knew that died, and that changed my life as well. And that was around the time I was learning astrology, and I started realizing that a lot of these things that happen in our life are meant to happen, and they're seen in the birth chart. They're seen in your the map of your soul, which is your birth chart. They're also seen in the transit chart. Sometimes certain transits through different houses in our birth chart trigger different events. That's why astrology it shows past lives. It shows past life patterns. It shows our soul mission. It shows all this. So there was an example for me, personally, when Pluto transited my 4th house of home and family, I lost 3 different people very close to me died. And Pluto transits are known to bring death, rebirth, transformation, loss, grief, but also healing and change, right? In whatever area Pluto transits. In the birth chart, I did a whole article about the 8th house in astrology, which is other books I've written that are out there, guys, if you want to hear. But that is where I started seeing trauma play out in someone's life. Every time someone tells me their story, I'm like, I bet you have 8th house planets. And they always do. And I started seeing this, and I'm like, this is unbelievable. So I figured there's 5 main patterns of people that have planets like sun, moon, specifically in the 8th house in their birth chart, or a lot of Scorpio energy, for instance. If someone has a lot of Scorpio, they often lose a loved one at a young age. I mean, I hear it over and over again from clients, and it's in the chart. And so I validate them. And just that validation of this is why, astrologically, I believe this is why it happened, because you're meant to go through this to help other people, because eighth house people are healers. They're wounded healers. They're meant to go out and help others. So many of them are in psychology, social work, medical field, energy healing, astrologers even. I mean, they have this interest in these metaphysical new age ideas, and they believe in it. So they're born with this. And then they're like, wow, that's me. How did you know this? And I'm like, this is astrology. I'm just validating what you already know about yourself. It's different than a psychic. I also have intuitive abilities that I bring into what I do. But it's very scientific. It's very much a tool that is accurate. And they're like, they just can't believe it. Like, I had a lady about 6 months ago. I'm a little careful how I tell people things, because I don't want to scare people, and we don't want to be fatalistic in astrology. We want to give people free will and choice, and they can understand the energies and work with them. And that's my goal. As, hey, this might happen, just to prepare you mentally, emotionally for this. Okay. Because during this transit, often people might lose a loved one. There could be something unexpected change in the home, right? I give them examples. I'm careful how I say it because I don't want to scare them. Well, I did this lady's chart, and I saw Pluto was right on the line of her fourth house transit going in and fourth house is home and family, your kids, your mom and dad, your roots, all that. And she literally called me 3 days later and said that her husband, I said, it could be your partner's parents, it's family in general, right? If you're married, that's your family too. She called, she said, I can't believe this. My husband's father died unexpectedly 3 days after you told me this in the reading. And she was like, I'm going to call you soon, So she said she felt prepared for it. Like it helped her be strong for her spouse, and that's what I see a lot of times. And even with my own life, like right now, I have a transit of the eighth house, and those transits are hard for anyone. And so many clients are coming to me that have these transits of the eighth house and 12th house. Those can be very difficult because they're the unconscious. They're about loss. They're about, transformation and change and rebirth, right? So they're difficult. And I have a transit going on. It's, Chiron, which is known as the wounded healer. And it's hitting my moon and my Jupiter and Chiron in my eighth house. And it is completely changing me and making me deal with things that I thought I had healed from years ago. Traumas, right? I've lost a lot of people unexpectedly through gun violence. Lost a high school friend randomly, was at her work, and there was a shooter. So I have this in my chart, and it validates, okay, this is why this is happening in my life, because my stories, I have a lot of stories, and everyone's like, wow, I can't believe you went through that. I had no idea, because I don't tell people a lot of my problems, number one, but also because I know it helps me understand, and I'm able to move forward quickly from things because I know it's astrological. Because the energy of astrology affects everyone, whether we believe in astrology or not. And the moon cycles, the full moon, the new moon, it affects life on Earth. I mean, the full moon, there's research out there for skeptics. The full moon affects the tides of the ocean. The moon in astrology affects our emotional nature. That's our emotions. So it affects our body. It affects our mind. It affects everything, animals as well.
Wow.
So, yeah.
How?
Yeah,
Sorry, how?
How? It intensifies our emotions. So research has shown during a full moon, there is an increase of domestic violence, domestic disturbances. Police officers and ER docs have even been interviewed about this, that more people report to the ER during a full moon. More people cops get called out to fights because people have a little bit more irritability. It makes us a little bit on edge because it affects our emotions, because our body's made up of mostly water. So, of course, these cycles are energies. That's what I call them. We see these planets out there and we think, well, how is that affecting us? It's because we're on a planet in the sky with it. And this moon, everything's energy. Everything is energy. And that's why I call astrology as energy. And we can harness the different energies of all 12 signs because we all have 12 signs in our birth chart. And if you want, I can explain like what a birth chart is. Some people are like, they may not know.
I don't think we're going to have time for that. Okay, I'm afraid it's time has definitely run on. I think probably just have time for one more question, which is the actual book itself. What comes up in it, and what would people expect from it?
Yeah, it's called Astrology, Zodiac, Archetypes, using your sixth sense to transform past life patterns. So what we did is I did a lot of research on Carl Jung's 12 main archetypes and the tarot card, the major arcana archetypes, and I connect them to each of the 12 astrological signs. I explain, their similarities. I also talk a little bit about 4 lenses, which comes from Myers-Briggs, the different true colors, and how each sign has an orange, blue, gold, or green. We have grids to explain, all of that, to teach you more about yourself, what tarot card archetype is associated with your sun sign, all of that in the book, a little bit more about Jung's archetypes, and we assigned one of them to each of the 12 signs because they have the same personality traits. And then we go into every sign has its own chapter. And, like Leo is the creator, the artist. We go into all of the basic information about Leo, their personality. Then we go into how can Leo use their sixth sense to transform patterns. And what that is we give very detailed things of the karmic patterns that Leo needs to let go of and balance. And, and we go, how we figure that out is we look at the polar opposite sign. So, Leos like to be on stage. Leos like to be, express themselves. They're creative. They're bold. They're also fire. So they're leaders. So, they're more than just being artistic. They're leaders. They can roar, right? So they have a strength about them. And that's why they're the strength card in the tarot deck, So we connect all of this and we let each sign know what things they need to balance and learn to heal their past life trauma and their past life karma. So that's all in the book. Very easy read. You don't have to know astrology to read our book. We make it very understandable for anyone to read, and it makes a great beginner's guide if you want to learn more.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. You've been listening to Carmen Turner Schott there. You can find the book on Amazon or the Talk Radio Europe bookshop. Carmen, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.